All right, we're back. Tonight is lucky chapter number 13. I think that's the only chapter I'm going to do. We're going to explore some of the things that kind of caught my eye last time that I did a live stream, and hopefully just keep this shorter. For some reason, I kept on putting off doing this tonight. I don't know why. I know I wanted to do it. I just was having trouble convincing myself to do it. I had to clean the kitchen. I had to do other stuff first. But I want to finish this book. I want to talk just a little bit tonight about what excited me last time, and we'll read chapter 13. So when we were going through this last time and hitting chapter 12, there was this segment right here, right on the second page of chapter 12, where they are clearly going into some kind of a representation of heaven. They're going to meet God, possibly, in this tear in the universe. And why am I thinking that? Well, there was a white light, first off, like the afterlife that many people have experienced. That's all discussed here in the chapters. And then there's this passage right here that clearly references to me Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. One of the quotes is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy itself, and the other one is a setup from the middle book in that series, which is second book is Restaurant at the End of the Universe. The third one I can never remember the name of. And then there's So Long and Thanks for All the Fish and Mostly Harmless. I can never remember the name of the middle one, so I'll have to look at the back here. Life, the Universe, and Everything. So it's a little thing toward the end of Life, the Universe, and Everything that is referenced again in the next book. So let's get into it. What caught my attention here? So they're going to heaven, and they've got all of these boundary things, and I'm sure each one of them is a reference to some kind of a fictional story boundary, right? There is... Well, there's a great Golden Gates. That's obviously just a reference to heaven. So we know right away we're at the Golden Gates, or the pearly gates. They're ornate, resplendent, set in the walls, shimmered like pearl. Yeah, these are the pearly gates. Yep. And then they disappear and they get replaced by other things, right? So you're going to see what is it? In place of the gates, there's a wall of stone, low enough to step over, with a terrible stillness of black sky behind it. I'm not sure what that's a reference to. And in place of the wall, a river so cold that it smoked, and the stones among which it ran were rimed with ice. And again, I have no idea. And in place of the river, a lintel-less doorway that reached up and out of sight and was full of stars. That's an interesting one. I feel like people who play Minecraft will be halfway familiar with it, but this is a lintel-less doorway. It's just this great big gate in the universe of some kind. Surely a great sheer flat cliff, surely one of the legendary walls of the world, with some message written on it in letters so huge that no one could read them. Now this one here, that one struck my interest because it sounded vaguely familiar. That was where I started going, oh, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy stuff here. Okay. Lieutenant Freeman Dyson Sphere, which is the basis for some of the stuff in the Ringworld novels. I think that there's a great big message. It's hard to see in those ones as well, but I'd really have to go and dig out Ringworld to see if there's a connection there to be had. Anyhow, the whole crew had to back up many paces before the words could be made out. A whoop of wild laughter broke out then from somewhere way back in the ranks. Lieutenant Freeman from Life Sciences. His laugh stands out even in a crowd. So I feel like that's got to be a reference to the mathematician that inspired so much science fiction, Dyson spheres, right? So that Freeman had even more reason for it now than usual. In red block letters, very neat, the writing on the wall said, "This side up." Unfortunately, the arrow painted beside the words pointed at the ground. The sign was upside down. So, I feel like this is halfway them speculating on what's on this wall, what God's message to the universe might be. In this case, it's like, oops, I'm sorry, which is very much a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy thing for God to have said as a message they've left to the universe. And we continue here, and this is where they lampshade it and very definitely say, yes, I'm thinking of Hitchhiker's Guide. I always knew there was something fundamentally wrong with the universe, someone female said from behind Jim. No, another voice replied as the sign vanished. That's just paranoia. Everybody has that. So that bit right there is definitely a reference to the first book in the trilogy in 5 parts, which is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We're talking a reference here to that very first book, toward the end when they have discovered the people who made the earth in the first place. Okay. Slarty Bartfast, the man who made the fjords. He's very proud of them. This is a horrifying name discovered for the guy who's the closest thing that Arthur's ever met to the god that he might or might not believe in. So they did all this work, and the Vogons came and destroyed it 5 minutes after the program. 5 minutes before the program to answer the questions of the universe could be completed, added Arthur, not unbitterly. Yes, said the old man, pausing to gaze hopelessly round the room. 10 million years of planning and work gone just like that. 10 million years, Earthman. Can you conceive of that kind of time span? A galactic civilization could grow from a single worm 5 times over in that time. Gone. He paused. Well, that's bureaucracy for you, he added. And this is where the quote comes in. You know, said Arthur thoughtfully, all this explains a lot of things. All through my life, I've had this strange, unaccountable feeling that something was going on in the world, something big, even sinister, and no one would tell me what it was. So this is a little unrelated, right? But, you know, things go wrong. I'm not in on whatever it is that makes it happen. And this is the answer. No, said the old man. That's just perfectly normal paranoia. Everyone in the universe has that. Everyone? Said Arthur. He's getting really excited about these insights he's getting. They're nothing. Just trite stuff, said Arthur. Well, if everyone has that, perhaps it means something. Perhaps somewhere outside the universe we know. Maybe. Who cares? Said Slarty Bartfast before Arthur got too excited. Perhaps I'm old and tired, and maybe I shouldn't be so excited for these references to appear. So, thinking back a little bit to the wall, Arthur becomes preoccupied with meeting God. He figures, because he's met Slarty Bartfast, and the universe is very big, that he can possibly do it. And so at the end of Life, the Universe, and Everything, the middle book in that sequence, the one whose name I couldn't remember, Arthur finds somebody who saw a message from God, right? There are signs, right? Between them, the dwellers of the forest looked up into the sky and saw the sign of the new star and saw it with fear and apprehension, for though they had never seen anything like it before, they too knew precisely what it foreshadowed, and they bowed their heads in despair. They knew that when the rains came, it was a sign. When the rains departed, it was a sign. So, fun times. Arthur goes and meets this wild man who has seen a message from God. All right. So he meets the man named Prak. Here we go. Prak paused in his story and coughed pathetically. I was the messenger, he said. After the battles precipitated by the appearance of your ship, you were particularly savage. Many of our people died. I thought I could bring the reason back. I went and was told it by the leader of the princes, but on the way back it slipped and melted away in my mind like snow in the sun. That was many years ago, and much has happened since then. So, this God's message might be the question for the answer. That's 42, right? So this is very important, right? He looked up at Arthur and giggled again very gently. There's one other thing I can remember from the truth drug, apart from the frogs, and that is God's message to his creation. Would you like to hear it? For a moment, they didn't know whether to take him seriously. It's true, he said. For real. I mean it. His chest heaved weakly, and he struggled for breath. His head lolled slightly. I wasn't very impressed with it when I first knew what it was, he said, but now I think back to how impressed I was by the prince's reason, and how soon afterward I couldn't recall it at all. I think it might be a lot more helpful. Would you like to know what it is? Would you? They nodded dumbly. I bet you would. And if you're that interested, I suggest you go and look for it. And here is where it's written in huge letters on a wall, so that you have to stand back to read the darn thing. It is written in 30-foot-high letters of fire on top of the quenchless Quasagar Mountains in the land of Sevorveopstri on the planet Prelium Tarn, third out from the sun Zars in galactic sector QQ7 active J Gamma. It is guarded by the Logistic Vantrashal of Lob. There was a long silence following this announcement, which was finally broken by Arthur. Sorry, It's where? He said. It is written, repeated Prak, in 30-foot-high letters of fire, on top of the quenchless Quasgar Mountains in the land of Sevor-Biupstri on the planet Prelium Tarn, third out from the... Sorry, said Arthur again. Which mountains? The quenchless Quasgar Mountains in the land of Sevor-Biupstri on the planet... Which land was that? I didn't quite catch it. Sevor-Biupstri on the planet... what? Oh, for heaven's sake, said Prak, and died, testily. So, Arthur is concerned about the message, and he doesn't get to it in this book. This book, which was, by the way, released the year before The Wounded Sky, so very well may have been on Diane Duane's reading list as she was writing this, and just needed to have a little bit of fun. Now, Douglas Adams does get back to it, and the message he puts there is not, unfortunately, this side up, written upside down on the mountain, but, it's the next best thing. And so here we go. 1992, is that right? It took him an awful long time. They had to lock him in a room to get him to finish these books. So where are we at? So 79 is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 1980 is The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. 1982, the year before The Wounded Sky, is Life, the Universe, and Everything. And then So Long and Thanks for All the Fish is where we finally see God's message written in 30-foot-tall letters of fire. Right? And it took, I guess, just 2 more years, 1984, so the year after. I doubt that they were in conversation, but I'm almost certain that Diane Duane must have picked up this book. And then it took another very, very long time. Possibly 1992 and 1995 were the last... Life, the Universe, and Everything. So long... Are there 6 books? 2, 3, 4, 5. Why do I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 copyright dates? Oh dear. I have no idea what that means. Here we go. Here's the actual dates. So here we go. So Long and Thanks for All the Fish was 1984, Mostly Harmless by William Heinemann, and I think that the last date must be for this whole compilation. Have I had it for that long? I suppose I have. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So, going on, what was written in those 30-foot-tall words of fire? Okay, so we're going to see the approach, because it takes a telescope to see the darn thing. They rounded the foot, it says here, right? They rounded the foot of the quenchless Quasgar Mountains, and there was the message, written in blazing letters along the crest of the mountain. There was a little observation vantage point, with a rail built along the top of a large rock facing it, from which you could get a good view. It had a little pay telescope for looking at the letters in detail, but no one would ever use it because the letters burned with the divine brilliance of the heavens and would, if seen through a telescope, have severely damaged the retina and optic nerve. They gazed at God's final message in wonderment and were slowly and ineffably filled with a great sense of peace and of final and complete understanding. Fenchurch sighed. Yes, she said, that was it. They had been staring at it for fully 10 minutes before they became aware that Marvin, hanging between their shoulders, was in difficulties. The robot could no longer lift his head, had not read the message. They lifted his head, but he complained that his vision circuits had almost gone. They found a coin and helped him to the telescope. He complained and insulted them, but they helped him look at each individual letter in turn. The first was a W, the second an E. There was a gap. We. An A followed, then a P, an O, and an L. Marvin paused for rest. After a few moments they resumed and let him see the O, the G, the I, the S, and the E. The next 2 words were for and the. So we've got we apologize for thee. And the last one was a long one, and Marvin needed another rest before he could tackle it. It started with a, and this is quite honestly the book being just as much of a one of these as God's final message. It started with an I, then N, then a C, then came an O and an N, followed by a V, an E, another N, and an I. After a final pause, Marvin gathered his strength for the last stretch. He read the E, the N, the C, and at last the final E, and staggered back into their arms. I think he murmured at last from deep within his corroding, rattling thorax. I feel good about it. The lights went out in his eyes for absolutely the very last time ever. Luckily, there was a stall nearby where you could rent scooters from guys with green wings. It was a long, long hike to get to see that message. We apologize for the inconvenience. Explains an awful lot, doesn't it? Just as much as this side up. So that's a long-winded way of just responding to what I read last day. This stuff is terrific fun. Don't take any of it too seriously, although I really do want to read the bibliography with all of you all when I get there. Chapter 13. The clear fire of the air had been blinding, but it hadn't hurt the eyes. It had burned the flesh, but painlessly. Now what Jim perceived as the source of the burning lashed out at the Enterprise crew, so that the bright air writhed and pressed, smothering in on them like a weighted wind, carrying with it a wordless expression of awful rage and terror. Reality tattered, not that of the landscape this time, but of the crew's own selves. Jim looked through the terrible brilliance at his people and saw their images distorting, their selves horribly pulled and torn, twisted from unearthly fairness to carnal horrors of bone and wet gristle and naked spilled-out organs. Cthulhu's shielding, he thought. Will it hold through this? Captain, a hoarse voice shouted, and that's not a yell, but whatever. With difficulty, Jim turned. The air fought him, and there was something happening to his own body that he didn't care to contemplate too closely, lest his attention help it along. Not far from him, Spock was doing his best to lever himself up off the ground. Jim looked at the Vulcan, or what remained of him, and his gorge fought frantically with the lower reaches of his throat. Jim wanted desperately to look away, and refused to, knowing who lived inside the illusory horror he was seeing. The ship, Spock said, loudly so his voice would carry over the wicked wind and the increasingly distressed cries of the crew. Under attack, and if we do not re-establish our reality. It'll shatter, Jim called back, and the ship with it. Understood. What Jim didn't understand in the slightest was how to re-establish a whole ship's worth of reality. He was having enough problems with his own. His flesh had started to crawl with a discomfort growing toward pain, as if the things he'd glimpsed happening to him were beginning to happen physically. Worse, by the now familiar group mind rapport, Jim could feel the same things starting to happen in his crew, and also sense their abortive and ineffectual attempts to stave off the effect. It'll never work. They're flailing around in all directions at once, not dealing with the source. That's it, he thought, and braced himself physically as best he could. A difficult feat. The increasing ache in his bones made Jim want to roll on the ground and moan. He looked around. Spock was on his knees now, his face contorted with agony as he dragged Uhura to a more or less sitting position. Tehenish was still crumpled from the blow the three of them had taken. No help from them, Jim thought frantically. Who then? Who'll be best at protecting the ship's reality till we can get a grip on our own? Scotty? Sir, someone else said. And Jim turned around with difficulty and found Chekhov standing there, staggering, but refusing to reach out for support. You get what you wish for, Jim thought. He reached out, took Chekhov by the arm, and shook him slightly, a wake-up gesture. Pull it together, Pavel Andreevich, he said. Spock and the others kick that whatever it is in the side, and it's kicking the Enterprise back. No, Chekhov said, straightening so abruptly he pulled Jim a little straighter as well. Sir, what can we... Wait. Scotty was with them, taking Jim's arm from the other side, supporting him. Your engines, Scotty, Jim said in a gasp. The inimicable... Of course, if something is going to get Scotty's attention, call him to action, it's the engines. Let's try that again. Your engines, Scotty, Jim said in a gasp. The inimical pressure of the air was making speech and thought more and more difficult. This keeps up much longer. They won't be able to toast bread. Not if I have anything to say about it. There, Jim said, staring straight into the frightfully blazing rent in the air. That's the source. Tell that what you won't let it do. Make it be that what you want to happen is happening. Grammar much? What? Make it be that what you want to happen. Make that be what you want it to be is happening. Do it. I can't read this. It gets crazy. He glanced from one to the other, saw Scotty's eyes narrow, saw Chekhov's jaw clench, then faced ahead again. The violent brightness made Zeta 10 Scorpii look pallid by comparison. Jim feared that, physical reality or no physical reality, he might burn out his optic nerves as he'd once feared Spock had. Not even squeezing his eyes shut would make a difference with light of this brightness. But that was hardly the point. He had a ship to protect. Not that I know how to do that, either. His role in most of his telepathic experiences had been passive. That did him no good now, when the best defense was offense. Still, he stared into the white fire, wincing, and denied it the destruction it desired. Then what McCoy had earlier warned him of happened, and Jim abruptly found his mind fallen together with those of Scotty and Chekhov into theirs. He reeled, for the intensity of the joining was no less than what he had experienced with Spock and McCoy. The Scots and Russians' milder experiences, their joys, Jim had shared in part. Now he shared their passions, both sets, all at once. It was almost too much. Jim's love for his ship was broad, for all its intensity, an inclusive emotion, extending to those who rode her. But he found now that it was a non-specific love compared to Scotty's, which was founded in an intimate hands-on knowledge of every circuit, every conduit and shaft and square meter of hull. Because of this, a danger to the Enterprise struck Scotty as worse than any threat to his own physical body. Also, his efforts had saved both her and him so many times that survival wasn't survival as far as Scotty was concerned, unless both of them lived. His utter determination that the Enterprise be kept safe and in good working order, along with his demolishing rage at anyone who would have it otherwise, poured out of him and into Jim from one direction. And from the other, Chekhov's equally fierce anger at an attack on the innocent and helpless came boiling up like a killer storm over the steppes, black, inescapable, licked with lightning, the wild young power that knew no boundaries. The determination to survive, anything an adversary could do to him, and then strike one stroke of his own that would stop the fight and prevent others. It all spilled, thundering into Jim, melding with Scotty's outrage, and that's probably the worst Chekhov, and also the worst Russian accent at the same time. I'm going for a world record. Melding with Scotty's outrage and anger, seeking an outlet, building. Jim had no idea what to do. He could think of nothing to add to such towering anger. Maybe I don't need to add anything, though. My art is to be at the center, to direct. Jim stared into the deadly brightness and thought as loudly as he could. Will you do us harm? We won't permit it, and this is how we'll stop you. The thought was evidently enough, for instantly Jim felt Scotty's and Chekhov's power go searing through him as McCoy's had. It struck him to his knees in its passing, leaving Jim wondering dazedly whether this was how a gunnery conduit felt when the phaser behind it was fired. He looked up in time to see the bitter brilliance waver. Coming from it, as Chekhov bent down to help him up, Jim caught an impression of an immense uncertainty mixed with terror. Then the anger again. No, Pavel, he said, and feeling Scotty's hand on his shoulder, pulled him down too. Stay down. We're not done, and one fall's enough. The great core of white fire lashed out again. There were more screams from the crew, and the sound of them enraged Jim so that he didn't bother thinking anything at the light, loudly or otherwise. He merely struck back in mind, and inside him, Scotty and Chekhov were a concentrated force of anger and strength that was frightening for Jim to comprehend. Has this kind of power been inside them all along? Or is it just this space? This time Jim felt the united force strike something, though it was something non-physical, and he felt the stricken essence reel back, away from them, radiating a more virulent terror than before, along with a wordless feeling that the terror was for some reason justified. "Once more!" Chekhov said, the words ringing through the wholeness that was the three of them. The brilliance was rippling again, as if for another attack. Pavel and Scotty gave it no chance. Instantly, if such a word applied where there was no time, they gathered Jim in so that he could give them a direction, then reached out and hit the brilliance with a mind blow like the fist of God coming down. And again, harder, till Jim's vision vanished for real from the shock of the impact in his mind. And once more! That was when they heard the scream, and it came from no one in the crew. "Enough, you two," Jim said to the other presences in his mind. "As you were." His vision was clearing. He looked around him and saw Spock getting Danish up, while various other crew members picked themselves up off the ground. He accepted Scotty's and Chekhov's arm support to get back to his feet again. "Good work," he said to them. "Scotty, you've been taking this lad into too many rough places on shore leave. He's picking up your style of brawling." "Ah, nah, Captain." Captain, oh my God, which one of the characters am I being? "Ah, nah, Captain," Scotty said, as Catullus came down behind him and chimed at him in concern. He reached down to scratch her longitudinal crest between the top two eyes. Seriously? Is she a cat now? Since when has Captain Kirk petted? Or is it Scotty who's petting? Catullus. "Yon's a natural aptitude. I'm not to teach him. A bit to learn, perhaps. There you are, then, Mr. Spock. Are you all right?" Spock and Uhura came up to join the group, followed by McCoy, on whom Dahanish was leaning. "Mr. Scott," Spock said, "I suspect I now have a referent for the term hangover. Otherwise, I am well. Captain, our attempt to communicate was a success." "If that was success," Jim said, rubbing his own head, "heaven preserve us from failure. Did that scream come from where I think it did?" "From that, sir," Uhura said, gesturing at the great brightness. "Yes, we broke through to it. It picked up quite a bit from us, very fast, just as we did from it. It learned existence sooner than I'd have thought possible. Unfortunately, when it fully comprehended there was some other existence, that it wasn't alone, it panicked. It was afraid we might hurt it."
"It can't run, Captain," Dahanish said, "so it does the only other thing it can think of. With thinking so new to it, it fights, tries to make the strange new somethings go away and leave it safe and secure in the old aloneness. That doesn't work either, so now it withdraws."
"Captain," Spock said, "you must understand that all these communications have been on a most primitive level. Not precisely feelings, certainly not as complex as thoughts, definitely not words. The word being, for once, correctly describes what we have contacted. All it is a being, an experience of existence without event, without other existence of any kind. It has been sealed alone inside this universe for what might as well be eternity, yet also not alone, for to be alone there must be other existence to compare the state against. It is of incalculable power, and also powerless, for there has been nothing against which to turn that power until we arrived. Only its inexperience saved us from destruction when it attacked us. We are good at doing. It never even had the concept until it borrowed it from us. And this is one of those things I remember from reading it before. The idea that something that's known nothing can do nothing. Something without something to act against is doing nothing. It's sort of a deeply religious idea that sort of sat there in my conception of what existence and creation is, and made some religious discourse make sense, even if it doesn't make sense. I don't know. Right. Then why isn't it doing something now? McCoy said, gazing into the heart of the light. "We frightened it," Uhura said sadly. "Leonard, we taught it pain, not just as an abstract. It knows there's an out now, but it may never want to come out because of the way we slapped it back." "People," Jim said, staring at the light with everyone else, "we're short of time."
"Right here."
Oh, sorry. Why did I read it that way?
Right, sir. So we're seeing what we can do.
Dahenish said, and took Uhura's dark hand in his furry one. Spock put a hand on the young Sadrau's shoulder. The three of them stood silent for a while, and once again Jim felt the power building in the air. A wordless plea demand that whatever heard it must declare who it was, what it was. Reach out. Speak. From back among his crew, Jim heard occasional inadvertent cries in response to the command. Fragments of words, names, secrets. Jim had to hold his mouth shut, had to clench his fists against the heart-shaking entreaty. He dared not allow himself so much as a sound for fear of distracting the three who sent out the call, or distracting its object. Speak to us. Be known. Don't be afraid. Who are you? For a seemingly endless time there was no response. Then the air spoke. The reply was soundless thunder. It was a frightened voice like a beaten child's, but immeasurably huge. It was a single thought that held choruses captive in it, and a multitude's power whispering in a trembling unison of uncertainty and fear. Jim felt the shaking begin again. He glanced around as he heard what the voices said, concurrently wondering and doubting if the others heard what he did. We are who we are, the brightness said. Oh, no, McCoy said in a whisper. I am that I am. At least we were, until you came. Spock took a step away from Uhura and Dahenish then. He lifted his eyes to the brightness and spoke, not in Basic, but in Vulcan, which they all now understood as easily as Catullux chiming in Hamalki. At the sound of the first sentence or so, Jim understood that Spock didn't dare trust his communication with this terrible, fragile entity to anything but the eloquent accuracy of Vulcan, which Jim could now fully appreciate for the first time. You still are, he said. We do not threaten that condition, though in your fear you threatened it in us. Do us no more harm. We wish no harm to you. That is why we sought contact with you, so that you might be protected from possible harm. There was no expressing the anguish with which the life in the brightness said the word. Jim found it hard to understand how something so multitudinous, so seemingly plural, could be so afraid of mere numbers, especially when the concept by which it referred to itself seemed plural too. He had trouble, in fact, understanding how such a power could be afraid of anything. How they could be afraid, he corrected himself. Jim stepped up beside Spock. Beyond this universe in which you live, there's another one. We come from that universe. Then that was true, then, that the others told us, the Brilliance said. All these concepts, because of their newness, came most tentatively, but none so tentatively as the terrifying concept of otherness. And there are more of what you are. Innumerable more, Jim said, gently, as he might have to a very small child. Like us, and unlike. 700 kinds of humanity, and even we don't know how many more than that scattered through our galaxy, and a billion others. The mere act of talking was drawing the great new minds into closer and closer union with theirs. Jim got a clearer sense of a power that was truly incalculable, and of an intelligence that would be given time and experience. He also felt fear turning to wonder and amazement that there should be something else to talk to, and a desire that this astonishing thing called talking should continue, feed the wonder, never stop. Others, the huge Brilliance said. We, too, then, are others. Correct, Spock said. And all of us are together. The others had some experience of time in the abstract from Uhura and Spock, but the form of time they understood best was Dehenish's, and it was his phrasing they used. Together now and always. The wonder grew, built to joy, grew past it. No, Spock said. His voice was calm, but even the most Vulcan parts of his personality were distressed at having to shatter this innocent ecstasy, born as it was of what a Vulcan treasured most, the desire to celebrate diversity. As for Spock's Terran parts, Jim felt their pain too. Too deep for tears, but held his peace. Even here, Spock had his pride. No. A portal, a doorway has opened between our two universes, Spock said. It must be closed, for the environment in which you live is fatal to us, and ours would be to you. Vast puzzlement came from the others. Death, too, was something they only had in abstract from their communication with the three. You are who are, McCoy said suddenly, with a terrible gentleness. Do you want to become you who are not? The others' fear came back in an intensity that could crush hearts. Now that they knew what existence was, the thought of its loss was abhorrent. They wanted no return to the permanent peace of their solitude. Yet, the great single multiple thought came back a moment later. If the portal is closed... We must be on the other side of it, Jim said. We cannot stay. But if you are gone, then this is lost, the others said. What this was clear. Life, communication, the eternal joyous celebration of diversity that had seemed laid out before them. And without your movingness, they had no closer equivalent to entropy. If that is sealed out with you, then there is nothing for us but what was before. The thought was a horror, sterile, silent, utter aloneness, the eternity of it made worse than ever by the discovery of consciousness and the knowledge that elsewhere life existed, forever out of reach. The portal must be closed, Jim said, and quickly. No, said the others in a vast unison of grief, as if a whole universe wept for loneliness. And then, with less sorrow and more anger, no! That you are here is what is. We will not have it otherwise. The air began to get thick again, the old storm of rage and fear stirring in it with a riptide of desperation added. We will not be deprived of what never was before, knowing that it will never be again. For they had correctly read the context behind Jim's thought, that this doorway must never be reopened once closed. We will not be shut back into nothingness, where nothing happens and nothing is except ourself alone for always. Thunder cracked above the Enterprise crew, rumbled in the white stone where they stood. Jim glanced over at Scotty and Chekhov, wondering if they'd be able to do anything this time. All through the conversation, Jim had been able to feel how the others were growing more powerful with every breath, every moment they spent conscious. He knew, too, as if from inside them, that they were quick students. Along with the anger eddying in the air came the sure knowledge that they understood the tactics last used against them very well, and would be quite able to defeat them now. That was hardly enough to cause Jim to give up. He glanced at Pavel and Scotty, a signal for them to drop into union with him again. Catch some of the others' eyes, you two, he said silently. We may need more help this time. No, you won't, McCoy said, and stepped past Jim, waving him aside. He walked up close to the eye-hurting, rippling brightness, so close that the fury of the life inside it tossed his hair like a high wind, and he had to brace himself against its force. So close that even his own brilliance was subdued, and he was only a silhouette. You were not very sure that you didn't want to become we who are not, he said, and there was more anger than just the others in the air now. Do you want us to become we who are not? Not only us, but all the lives there are, on all the billions, on all the worlds we come from, and a billion others? Just because you can't have the movingness, You're going to kill it all? Everywhere? Is that it? Jim watched McCoy with fear, not moving, not daring to. The rage in the air was once again becoming a physical thing, pushing and yanking at those closest. McCoy staggered in its blast, but would not back down. Why should we be surprised? The first thing you tried to do was kill us. His voice cracked, whip-sharp. So go ahead and finish it. And have your first two deeds since you came to consciousness be the attempt at murder and success at it. No one in the crew moved. The ferocity whirling in the air got no less, but it didn't increase either. And Jim and all the people around him held their breaths. Kill, then, McCoy said. You have the power, but know what you're killing. 400 lives that desire life and the presence of other lives as much as you do. He waited, facing the fierce bright wind, not moving. For long moments it held steady, a gale of frustration and pain, and the Enterprise crew clutched at one another to stay standing. Then, very slowly, the anger began to die down. It faded gradually from the air like clearing smoke, and its pressure fell away. You are so much more, McCoy said then, in a voice that shook with compassion and with certainty. Far more than death and pain. Just let yourself find out. For a long while, nothing but silence. Then the others spoke again. We can't take this precious thing from you, that we ourself would not have had except by your gift. What you say must be done. That we will do. McCoy had stepped back to stand by Jim and Spock again. Jim glanced silent thanks and praise at Bones, then said again, sorrowfully, The portal must be closed. Soon. Then we will be marooned here by ourself, and with no other to stand beside. We will not be here either, the others said, in an agreement as bleak as any Jim had ever heard. That would seem to mean we will not perceive what has happened once it has. You need not sorrow. Enterprise crewmen on all sides turned to one another in pain, feeling the other's anguish. I cannot help but sorrow, Jim said. He had rarely meant the words more. The thought of this staggeringly powerful being, shut back in the uneventful, placid, terrible timelessness where they had found it, from which they had freed it. He shook his head. Spock, he said, there must be something we can do. The Enterprise crew people were looking at one another in distress, at the other's anguish, as Spock turned to Jim. Captain, he said quietly, indeed there must. And that is not a problematic statement, but an imperative. Once again we must deal with the consequences of our tampering, and with a great irony. Jim looked at his first officer quizzically. You identified part of the situation yourself on the way to this place, Spock said. To the side of the angels, you said. The doctor identified it more specifically when the others stated their name. And now all the requisites are here, Captain. Timelessness, being without physicality, potential plurality in oneness, existence without creation, and from all time. We have, in fact, found God. Not one that any of our humanities would recognize as its own God, however. Nor is this some extremely powerful being, formerly mistaken for deity, like others the Enterprise has met. This, or these, I should say, are a proto-god. They might very well have cracked their shell in their own time, invented existence and creation on their own, and done well enough here by themselves. But we will never know now, because of our interference. Our use of the inversion drive caused us to come here and crack their shell prematurely, and now we have taught them existence and consciousness and the desire for communication, none of which we or any other being may gratify by remaining here. for our self-preservation, for the sake of the galaxy, and all the right reasons, we are in such violation of the Prime Directive as not even the Enterprise has managed before, and ethics would seem to require that we do something to ameliorate the situation, since neither we nor anyone else will ever have another chance. Jim nodded, feeling numb. The question of what Starfleet would think never occurred to him. He was primarily occupied with the bitter anguish beating in the air like a heart, and the thought of saving one universe while leaving another one maimed behind him. "You taught the others creation, Mr. Spock," he said, grasping at the straw. "We did, sir. But creation, like any other action, requires entropy. And the entropy here is a temporary local phenomenon, due only to our presence." Spock stopped, very abruptly, seeing his captain's eyes widen. Jim looked up at him, a speculative expression on his face. "Mr. Spock," he said, "are you thinking what I'm thinking?" For once the question was rhetorical. They both knew Spock was. "It is no accident," Spock said, with the tight control characteristic of his excitement, "that we have a creative physicist with us." Jim turned around. "Catullus!" he called. "I was wondering when you'd think of me," she said sedately from right behind him. "Best not smile too soon, Captain. The answer's not going to be as simple as you think." So, they've discovered a god, and they're going to leave some kind of an entropic emissary in its universe. Find out in Chapter 14. Have yourselves a very good night.